For the couple of folks that are here that aren't aware, my name's Kevin Phelan, and I'm Phelan Corrimal in Second Life. I'm the president of Rockcliffe University Consortium, and what I'm going to be doing a presentation on here today is talking about a little bit about inside the Avatar Studio and some of the future of what avatars may be looking at based upon the insights that our guests have had over the last couple of years. So for those that don't know, Inside the Avatar Studio is a program that runs approximately every 3 weeks. What we do is we have a sit down. It's a very informal coffee table type chat with experts in virtual technology, and literally we just discuss their perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's economy. And as part of that, we get to go down all kinds of really neat side topics. It's not so much a question and answer type program as it is about really trying to get at the core of what people really perceive as being the competitiveness of this particular type of environment. Why is it important? What does it mean for people? Why should they pay attention? And this has really been an ongoing question since I started in Second Life, actually before I started in Second Life in about 2006. The ongoing question has always been, okay, we're here, so what? What do I do next? And, it's in some ways it's a very simple question to ask and to answer. In some ways it's a very difficult question to ask and answer. So, we've got, and you might have to scroll in order to see this, but we've got a fairly long guest list that we've interviewed over the last couple of years, and some very big names in terms of working inside Second Life. Understanding what the nature of this is, and then also taking some of the salient learning from within this environment and taking it outside of Second Life, having a lot of that back and forth between real life and what's going on in here. So, there's been some really unique perspectives that we've had from these people as part of the program that we've had over the last several years. Actually, let me just scroll back here one slide. I myself am just going to scroll in because there's a couple of really interesting ones on here that are really sort of worth noting. Certainly the one with, where is he here? Doug Thompson. That was an absolute incredible show, and if you get a chance to take a look and watch it again, it's on both Metaverse TV and Avatar Studio, both of those websites. The other one was the one that we just recently finished, and that was with Beverly McCarter, and we were talking about wicked problems, and we got into all kinds of really neat and esoteric type ideas. And it's, sometimes the topics are really dynamic and they're really sort of out there in terms of some of the ideas that we get to, and then some of them are, how should I put this? We've had a couple of them where they've turned into question and answer sessions, which isn't exactly quite the type of thing that we were hoping to get out of the sessions, but they're still good sessions, but it's the good ones are always when you get the opportunity that you can go off on tangents that you were never expecting to go down. So whenever we get a chance to do a tangent, it's always a good opportunity to take it, because that's really where we start to learn and to understand what really the nature of being an avatar is. So essentially we have this question around the avatar, to be or not to be. That is the question. Who are you? What do you want? Where are you going? Right? And these are the types of questions that we're really trying to get down to an answer on. And as we start posing these questions in terms of, perceptions of where we've been, perspectives of where we are, predictions of where we're going, it's really been kind of funny, because while all of these people have their different expertise in terms of what they do, they also all seem to keep coming back to the same common themes. And at some point, I actually have to go back and rerun through every single one of these things, because every time I go back through one of the video recordings, there's more information that I tease out of each of the individual recordings. But in going back through a number of these, there's some very, very common themes that keep coming out again and again. And I'm going to be talking about each of these in a little bit more detail, but I mean, essentially they're dialogues, in terms of the stories we tell, socialization and social networking. Technology is a huge, 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 huge subject. And it seems that every time we go away from the idea of technology, we keep coming back to it, right? I mean, it's one of these very ubiquitous topics that you can't seem to get away from when you start talking about these things. Economic value, innovation, behavioral, and communications. So those are the 7 main sort of areas that what we've found is that there's very common themes regardless of which area of expertise you start in on or start talking about. So let me start with the largest one of the 7, right? Sort of the group of 7 type of thing, very Canadian type term. Dialogues. And some of these things are not going to come as a surprise. Some of these things are, we've been living it, we've been breathing it, so we sort of, the people that are immersed in this sort of understand this. But, people who are not embedded into these particular types of things just don't necessarily get it sometimes in terms of Mel's just suggesting I walk side to side, and unfortunately I don't have the right AO to be doing that. I will try. We'll see if I can get some back and forth motion going here. Anyway, so I mean, as we start talking about dialogues, I mean, we're talking about stories. We're talking about the way in which we tell stories. And certainly the largest piece of this, and this has been evident in almost every single person that we've talked to, is the avatar as both the consumer and the creator of dialogue stories inside this environment. And that's a huge, 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 huge component of what it means to be virtual. It's the way in which the technology enables us to express things that are important to us as individuals in a way that other people can relate, both not only, I guess to a large extent, not only from just hearing it, but from participating in it. And that's really sort of one of the key things. I mean, if you have a conversation with somebody in Skype, you're not really engaging them as a consumer, right? It's similar to reading a newspaper almost, right? I mean, yes, there is two-way communication, but it's a push, it's not a pull. And it doesn't matter which technology you take. I mean, if you take WebEx, if you take Sococo, if you take a lot of these other type things that are emulating, those particular types of environments, you still don't get the type of immersive consumerism involved in telling your story to somebody else. And this really leads into this idea of gamification, right? And this whole idea that the core elements of what it is that we're trying to do is to build identity and relationship as part of the stories. And to a large extent, to get feedback from that allows us to then incorporate new learning and new understanding of the way that we're trying to tell the story. So it really becomes, to a large extent, and I'm going to refer to this a little bit later as well, but I mean, it really becomes a very almost intimate experience, right? The way one of our guests presented it was this idea of, sitting down at a campfire and how you have that immersive experience with those particular people. It's not just about the fact that you're telling the story, but it's the fact that other people are there and they're participating and they're active. You're getting cues, you're getting feedback from that. And the way in which we get to interpret and the way we get to react to the way those stories are told. Quite often we find throughout history that the same themes are being repeated in the stories that we tell time after time after time. And it's not so much that we're repeating these themes, but there's two different things as part of this. One is this cultural perspective, and the other one is the interpretation. And to a large extent, interpretation is really based on a couple of different things. One is the culture in which we're embedded in at the time, and the other one is the events that are surrounding us. So, even though we keep regurgitating a number of themes over and over again, right, there's still, if you want to look at it from a traditionalist standpoint, right, the idea of tradition versus modernism and postmodernism, we have these traditional stories that we tell, but every time we tell them with a postmodern flavor that is representative of the situation that we're currently in at the point in time that those stories are being told. And it's influenced by what we wear and what we eat and what we're doing and what technology is around us and what the weather is doing. I mean, there's just so many different things that make the story unique and innovative for people to become engaged with. And it's a very, very important part, I think, in terms of what it is that we get out of this particular environment that you don't get out of other environments. Right? This idea of differentiation between views and reality and perspectives, and the difference between how individuals and groups respect the perspectives of what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of these things that really get tied into what it means to be an avatar. So, and to that extent, one of the really neat things about being an avatar is it's not about being a cartoon. It's not about whether you're a small kitten or whether you're dressed up as, whatever it is that I'm dressed up as, right? Or whether you're wearing a hard hat or whether you're, the cartoon aspect of it really doesn't matter, right? What matters is the way in which the perspectives are being influenced as a result of these things and how these things all fit together. And it changes the flavor of the story as we become immersed in each other's telling of those things which are important to us. So dialogues is a huge, huge portion of what it means to be an avatar. Yeah, the fish is getting nervous. Yeah, no kidding, eh? So the second big aspect, and probably the second largest aspect of what comes out of a lot of these discussions that we've had, is this idea of socialization. And what you're going to find is that some of these things will sort of cross boundaries with one another, right, to a large extent, because, I mean, things that we talk about, dialogues influence socialization, influence technology, influence, right? So, I mean, don't think that these are all cut and dry. I mean, there's a lot of crossover between a lot of these things. But when we start looking at the idea of socialization, right, we're looking at things such as immersion. We're looking at things such as augmentation. And those two really become a very dynamic component in terms of, really how it is that we look at the avatar itself. Is the avatar a brand or is it a tool? Because if you look at it as a brand, then you are going to be more focused on the immersive experience and the aspect of how the toon is dressed and how they react and how you react is going to be far more important than if you're looking at it from an augmentation perspective, which is very tools based, right? And so this is, really, really fairly key to this idea of socialization. How we approach the social networks around us is quite often driven by which one of these two that we perceive ourselves as fulfilling as part of our individual needs. One of the other really, really unique things that came out of, and this was a really interesting perspective, especially for me, because it was something that I had sort of played around with, but really hadn't solidified in my own head about this. Technology as a participant. And, this whole idea has come out of this concept that technology in of itself seems to have developed its own life to a large extent. We can't go back. We can't turn it off. Where we're at is where we're at. And the technology, despite our best efforts, is sort of gaining a life of its own. It has its own evolutionary path. And as we start talking about socialization, one of the things that I think that you're going to start to find is that the socialization, the technology actually needs to be considered as a participant in the social discussion. So while we sort of like to pretend that the technology is not there, and Second Life is a very clear example of this, because Second Life is one of these things that once you become immersed in this, the technology seems to disappear, right? Once you get by the learning curve, the technology just sort of peters off into the background, and we just expect it to work, and we don't notice it until it doesn't work, right? And then all of a sudden we notice it. But the technology itself is in fact a participant in what we're doing. And so we have to a large extent, one of the things that's going to happen both for individuals and for businesses and for nonprofits and educations and hospitals and government and all that good type of stuff, is people are going to have to start realizing that the way in which we approach technology is going to have to necessarily change. It's not static. It is an enabler, but it's not quite just only a tool. And it's sort of somewhere in the middle. And that concept, I think, is something that we're going to have to explore over the next year, because, I mean, that is something that I think really needs to be driven out more than what we understand it to be right at the moment. Socialization, peer-to-peer type relationships is another big one. This idea that coaching and mentoring is being delivered from the social network itself. I mean, one of the really interesting things is it doesn't matter which social network that you go into, it doesn't matter which virtual world you go into, the exact same thing happens in every single one of them. The first two things that show up is education and a helper group and a mentor group. Those are the first two things that almost inevitably show up in any single one of these virtual worlds. It is a fundamental component of who we are as a society that we want to pass on. We want to have that peer-to-peer relationship with our colleagues inside these particular environments. And when we're forced into situations where those structures are being divided, and I won't mention, yes, I will mention names, such as what London Lab did to us all a couple of years ago, where they basically took our peer-to-peer relationships and shot them off into the netherworld. It's very disconcerting, right? And it is one of those things where, it's society itself, I mean, we want to have these particular types of structures in place. And then when we're forced to be in a position where we can't have them, it throws everything into chaos. So, we have these things where people want to collaborate. They want to be individuals, but they want to collaborate. And it's that balance between the two that is, again, one of those things that I think is really going to become very, very important as avatars, the idea of an avatar continues to develop. And then the intimacy of the experience is also the other big one. And this is both social and with regards to dialogues and behaviors, and we'll come back to this again. This is another really one of these big reoccurring themes. The whole intimacy of how we put ourselves out there to other people. Even what I'm doing here with you guys right now is, to a large extent, a very intimate experience, right? It is one of those things where it allows people, in this particular environment especially, allows people to have that opportunity to do things that maybe they were very, very afraid of doing in the first place, right? Perfect example, I was the worst person for giving any type of a presentation in high school. I would clam up. I wouldn't do it. It wouldn't happen. Right? I'm the kid in the class that got the 0 because he'd refused to go up to the front of the class and give the 10-minute talk, on whatever, right? D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, or whatever it is that we're talking about that particular time. Very this becomes a very intimate experience. And there's some really core aspects that are going to come in a couple of minutes here that really tie into this, and I think are going to make this a lot more clear. But I mean, it's one of those things where, again, you have people reaching out to one another, and it's in a very supportive environment. That's a very healthy thing, right? Now, compare that to EVE Online, where the objective of the game is to send you home in tears. It's a little bit of a contradiction in terms, but even in something like EVE Online, you have this peer-to-peer group, and you have these other relationships that are developing, and I think it's just, to a large extent, one of the things that we get to see inside this environment is exactly what it means, not just to be an avatar, to be human. In terms of what is our base nature, and one of the neat things about this environment is that we can pick those types of things apart. We can go through and we could start playing around with those types of things and see exactly where some of these things land. Technology is the third really big really big aspect that gets talked about a lot as part of Inside the Avatar Studio. There is almost no way to avoid a discussion of technology, as much as we want to talk about the psychology of what it is to be an avatar. I mean, these two topics just absolutely cannot be divorced from one another. One of the biggest things that has come out of a lot of the conversations is this disconnect between, and it's unfortunate that Philip's still not around, because I'd love to have a little bit more of a conversation with him on this particular topic, but Philip had talked about a while back that one of the big things that they misread early on when developing Second Life was the advent of the laptop, and that they were completely caught off guard by how quickly technology was developing. And that is I think that's a very ubiquitous type thing that's been going on throughout the last 9 years with Inside Second Life. We predictably, right, look at things, and they consistently either underperform or overperform our expectations. And by overperform, I'm not really meaning that in a positive way. Buyer Sellers was talking about two different things. One is the idea of the planning fallacy, and this idea of motivated reasoning. The one being, how long does it take to get something done? Are we over-promising and under-delivering? Which God knows that would never happen in Second Life. The other aspect being this idea of motivated reasoning. Self-reinforcement of an idea, of a idea that we believe in, where we go out and we deliberately look for evidence that reinforces that idea, even though there may be no justification for it. So, as a result, we have this tendency to get ourselves into a little bit of trouble with regards to, especially with regards to technology, in underestimating the actual impact that it's going to have on us going forward. So, we could take a very real example of this. If you look at this idea of the cloud, so to speak, and the idea of the cloud is, if you look at it from the IEEE perspective, they're talking about this idea that you would put your information into, quote unquote, the cloud, and you might have one packet over here and one packet over here and another packet over there. It would be completely disassembled, right? There'd be no way for somebody to hack your information without having the key that would reassemble all the parts to bring it back. Now, the reality of being able to accomplish something like that, we are still 5-6 years away from, right? The technology, while in principle is there, The ability to do it is really not. And then you compound that with Apple coming along and saying, ooh, look at us, we have the iCloud. It's sort of like, no, I've just turned all my data over to you, and now instead of having it, be on a server that might crash in my house, it's now on a server that might crash in your house, and I've got no idea that if I don't pay my bills with you, I've now lost my data, right? I mean, there's risks that come along with that. There's a concept out there in terms of technology, and I don't want to get onto a big iCloud thing, but as we start to get these innovations that come along, we have this tendency to want to jump onto, anything new that sort of comes along, which isn't necessarily the right approach. And I think to a large extent, this idea of having an avatar and having to work with and having to have the avatar work through multiple different servers and sessions and information is going to become vitally important to the way in which that technology is eventually going to develop. As Crap Mariner is talking about, most cloud-hosted application servers only run on one instance. And that's exactly the problem. That's not the cloud. That's called, give me your credit card and let me bill you for something that really you don't need, right? I mean, yeah, the Apple thing is kind of neat, but in all honesty, you could have done it just as easily from home, right? So, you got those particular types of problems. The other thing that comes up, and it's come up in conversation a couple of times, is this idea of leapfrogging, where groups will come into a particular new technology. If you look at the introduction of cell phones in China or in Africa, and where they've never even seen a telephone in some cases before, never mind a computer. And all of a sudden, you introduce this smartphone, and they have no preconceptions in terms of how they should be using that particular technology. All they know is they have this tool that now allows them to do something that they couldn't do before. So instead of saying, wait a second, I need to understand all the integrated parts that led up to this point, now all of a sudden they're doing very, very innovative things that nobody over here ever thought of, because we are caught up in a paradigm where we have gone through all the intermediate steps. It's sort of like trying to figure out why the heck your 5-year-old can program the I'm going to go back a little bit, probably a bad example. Why the 5-year-old can program the VCR and you're still trying to figure out how to make the clock stop flashing 12, right? I mean, those particular types of problems, right? Children come from a place where they're not burdened by the experience that has led up to that particular point, right? And so they can make that intuitive leap faster than the rest of us who are now burdened down with stuff that we essentially have to unlearn. And yeah, the VCR example is, we got to find a new example, right? I mean, it's just, maybe the flashing 12 on the microwave, I don't know. Because certainly the iPods don't flash 12, right? Although it'd be funny if they did. That would be funny. Sorry, I just complete aside. So either way, I mean, we have these things. Heuristics, simulation, huge component of what is coming out of the discussions right at the moment. Almost everybody is talking about, and this ties into gamification, everybody's talking about heuristics and simulation in terms of where we're going in the future. And this is a matter of two different things. One is the simplification of how we can develop a simulation within a virtual environment. That's the first component. The second component is intelligent NPCs, non-playing characters, right, that have some type of logic programming behind them in order to interact effectively with that particular environment. And there is so much that is happening that's coming along and is continuing to develop over the next couple of years. It's one of these things that I've been talking about for quite some time. The toolbox that we need to really use this environment effectively is just simply not here. This is still a programmer's dream, because to do all the really innovative things, the things that are eye-popping, the things that really catch people's attention, requires a dedicated team of programmers and graphic designers to come in at anywhere between $50 to $90 an hour for 6 months to a year to sit down to program something that the user is going to consume in a matter of 30 days. The value proposition is not there yet, right? It's not like trying to set up a WordPress site or trying to set up a Drupal site where all you have to do is just go in, hit a couple of buttons, say, here's my $5 for my website, and off you go. We're not there yet. We're not even close, right? But people are working on it. And these are things that are going to be coming along and that will influence the way in which you use your avatar, especially when we start looking at this from the difference between this idea of immersion and augmentation. You know, how do you want to use your avatar within those particular environments? Okay. So, and I'm going to have to apologize. My eyes are not that good, so I got to scroll in on the screen here. Distinctive evolutionary path. I referred to this a little bit earlier, where technology has sort of grown beyond our pace in order to rein it in. It is essentially on its own evolutionary path. There is just simply nothing we're going to be able to do to stop it other than pull the plug, right? Which I don't think anybody, you know, God only knows what would happen if everybody's iPhone just stopped working tomorrow. I mean, there would be riots in the street, I'm quite sure. As the technology evolves, and it will evolve, I mean, it's evolving at such a fast pace that we have to be ready to adapt to what that evolutionary path is going to mean, not simply adopt whatever is thrown at us. Right? Apple throws a new iPhone out there and everybody says, ooh, I got to go buy it, without thinking about, what does that really mean for me as an individual, right? Yeah, and to a certain extent, the pace will get faster. I mean, even if the hardware were to come to a hard and fast limit, which they're talking about, computers are getting up to the point where the speed of light is actually becoming an issue right at the moment. All the application side of things is still, we've still got 20, 30, 40 years before all of that stuff will catch up to where computers have brought us, right? Even if they stop developing 15 years in the future, we've still got a whole pile of innovation that's going to come flying at us. And, that's still got its own learning and evolutionary path that it's going to go through, which is going to be separate and distinct from where computers are going to end up. So, these are things that we have to be willing to adapt around, not necessarily adopt, right? And we have to be careful in terms of how we approach this. One of the other things is this idea of rapid prototyping. We're already seeing this happen inside, over the last 3 or 4 years right now. A lot of groups that left Second Life because of the expense and what have you of what's going on in here. A lot of them have done two different things have happened. They've either gone the ultra cheap route, so they've gone over to the Science Sims, or they've gone over to Reaction Grid, or they've gone over to InWorlds or what have you, basically the opensim type route. Or they've gone to the high-end virtual world products, right? Unity 3D, which is sort of a mid-range type thing, but there's a lot of other options that really start to get into the type of things that the large budget movie type production houses are really sort of getting into and using. So, but in a lot of cases, they still come back to Second Life and say, something, let's just do something off on the side and we'll prototype something in here. Right? And that, this is still, right, never mind everything else that's going on, this is still the best environment for doing rapid prototyping of ideas, of concepts, of sketches. There is no other environment that matches, dollar for dollar, that matches this environment right at the moment. It just doesn't exist. There's nothing out there. Right? Even opensim, to a large extent, because of some of the performance issues, right, even though it's getting better, still doesn't match Second Life. So dollar for dollar, this is still the prototyping environment. Right? But people are going from here. Once they've got it, they take it from here and then they go somewhere else. So, we have these things that are going on, and I think one of the things that we have to realize as avatars is that Second Life won't always be the rapid prototyping environment. At some point, this is going to get supplanted by something else unless London Lab changes their direction. So, we're going to see some innovation. We're going to see some interesting things, but there will be other competitors that come online, right? And so again, from this idea of immersion versus I'm really good with names here. This immersion versus augmentation discussion. Where are we really going with this, right? And this is a huge topic of discussion. In some cases, there's some very concrete agreement. In other cases, there's some very disjointed, discussion in terms of where a lot of this stuff is going. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch over the next little while. The next big one is economic value. And certainly as we start discussing this, we've had our share of business people that come on board and talk about a lot of this stuff. I think the core thing in terms of economic value is this idea of thinking differently. And this is a consistent theme that has come out of just about everybody that we've talked to. This idea that virtual worlds has been driving a couple of different things. It's been driving people to think differently, especially about economic models, right? I mean, the standard economic model is land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial experience, and that is what drives value, right? But we don't have that in Second Life because there is no land. Everything is virtual, right? There's no, the cost to replicate one chair in Second Life is the same cost. It's the same cost to replicate. My apologies, my mouth is not working here. Replication of one chair or a million chairs costs exactly the same, right? There's no difference in cost. In a proper economic system, there is a substantial cost between producing the first unit and producing the millionth unit. And so that is causing people to think differently. And because there are economic models that are developing around the virtual frontier, it's also causing people to act differently, right? So we have these things where people are trying to say, okay, if I've got something that can be replicated through copy bots or whatever else 1 million times, then how am I going to extract value from that? And we understand that in any case where that happens, where the cost of producing the millionth unit is not substantially greater than producing the first one, we know in traditional economic systems that has the result of creating a commodities-based economy, which is a very difficult thing to try to work your head around, because that means that everything that you're doing is based upon high volumes and low margins. And that's an extremely competitive market, right? In the way in which we have our entire economy structured, right? Most organizations have to be extremely mature before they can take on that particular type of an organizational type structure that will support a profit model for that. But within here, we don't have a choice. We have to find ways in order to accommodate that. So as a result, the way we do economic assessment is changing. It's already starting to change, and as a result of that, we're seeing new economic models that are starting to come out. If you take a look at Excite in here in terms of the economic model that they had, one of the big, one of the first big ones to come out of this particular environment, just an economic model that would just completely not work in the real world. Same thing with Ashley Chung's real estate model, right? Just would absolutely not work in the real world. I mean, they've tried to mimic something, right? In some cases, they've tried to mimic. Yeah, Lilith heart plants. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've tried to mimic something that would, under normal circumstances, work in the real world. But then how do you make that work inside a virtual setting? And a lot of these things that we've been talking about in terms of the idea of immersion and building brand and building customer loyalty, a lot of these factors, these socialization factors, become far more important inside that context than it does when you actually have a fixed cost in terms of land, labor, and capital in order to produce the same type of goods. So, huge discussions around there, and certainly there's already been some implications of changes happening in, quote unquote, the outside world that have sort of been a spillover effect. As we start to get more and more of the economy being driven by virtual sources. We're going to see more of that spill over into mainline type of economic activities. And it hasn't really happened yet. There's some indications that it's starting to happen, but it's not really there just yet. Right? There's still this divide, and once that divide starts to be crossed, we're going to see all kinds of very interesting things come about. Hopefully positive things, but once the lawyers and the copyright people get involved, who knows what's going to happen. Technology and innovation is two of these things that also sort of go hand in hand. Typical economic drivers say that niche market, creative destruction, and cross-disciplinary teams, cross-disciplinary activities between companies is the way you build value, right? This is the traditional model. However, right, again, with regards to innovation and innovation within a virtual context, right, cross-company innovation doesn't happen as much as it should. Right? Everybody's in here because they can do it better, faster, cheaper. Entrepreneurial spirit, which is, again, one of these driving factors, is really huge in terms of here. And everybody seems to have this impression that if I'm going to do this, I should do it on my own. Right? I don't need anybody's help. I can do this. Right? It's one of the pitfalls, or false friends, so to speak, when you're dealing with something that has a very low barrier to entry, right? So you come in here, you can compete head-to-head with Coca-Cola in here. You can compete head-to-head with Pepsi or with Nike or with IBM or with anybody else inside this environment because nobody cares. Everybody's a cartoon in here. Everybody's on a level playing field, right? So the barriers that have been lowered that have allowed more people to gain access are also the same barriers that sort of need to be in place in order to foster, to promote innovation to a certain extent, and to allow these other things, niche markets and the opportunity to essentially destroy things that are inside the marketplace right at the moment. These are the same barriers that sort of need to be in place to allow those other things to happen. So we have some very big challenges with regards to innovation. The innovation story itself is very straightforward, right? I mean, certainly there are people doing very innovative things here. Linden Lab will not open up the viewer to allow third-party plugins, so people have been extremely creative in trying to find ways in order to bring in heuristics and simulations that are being driven by third-party servers and applications and programs in order to get that connection to work. Right? And that's been being driven by the fact that we don't have as much open source on some of these things that we would like to have, right? They're deliberately looking at this as a closed environment. That may be all well and good for whatever they think their revenue model should be, but eventually it's going to backfire, because if you don't have those cross-company innovations, if you don't have that cross-disciplinary work that can be done, and which can't be done with inside a single company, right, then where's your innovation going to go? Well, eventually it's going to go in the toilet, and that's just all there is to it. I mean, it's just the way things work. What does that mean in terms of an avatar? It means that, you do want to be looking for those companies that do have, open access, that are not closed systems, right? The system that is closed is a system that is, I guess to a large extent, closed maybe because people feel that it would destroy the unique nature of the environment, is also closed to the ability to do rapid innovation. And that's the surest way to get left behind in the dust. So, when we talk about economics and innovation and technology, these things are all sort of joined at the hip. One of the other big challenges that we're going to have, and this has come up a few times, not all that often, but certainly we've had a few people on, have talked about this idea of copyright and this idea of the differences between open source and closed systems. And this is, I think, going to be one of these huge issues that is going to be a continual problem for avatars as we go along. I mean, we can take a very concrete example of this is simply looking at Linden Labs terms of service, and I realize they've backed off this a little bit, but the fact of the matter is it's still inside their terms of service, which basically says anything that you develop in Second Life belongs to Linden Lab, which is a huge difference from where we started, which was anything you develop in Second Life belongs to you. Right, which is one of the reasons why a whole pile of people left, right? Because it's, they were sort of sitting there going, well, wait a second, I'm putting my time and my effort into something and I don't own it. That's wrong, right? If I want to do that, I'll go to work, right? I mean, IBM, Microsoft throws that in every single contract that they have, right? It's, you develop anything on work time, it belongs to the company, right? Doesn't matter if it's your idea or not. So, we're going to run across these copyright issues more and more and more as we go along, I think, and certainly that's going to be an open discussion for quite some time. This idea of behavior is another thing that keeps coming up. And it's interesting because as we start getting more and more into some of the psychology type discussions, one of the things that we've started to find is that people have within here, again, and this leads back into this idea of intimacy of how you treat your social networks, right? So people have to a certain extent, very predictable behavioral patterns, right? Yes, this is an emergent environment. Yes, it provides people with diversity of experience, which is good from a personal growth perspective. But then a lot of that stuff also gets tempered by people's individual comfort zone. So while we want to have expansion of reach, this idea of is in the box, out of the box, are we pushing the envelope, are we not pushing the envelope, did we get a paper cut, these types of things. While these environments definitely have an expansion of reach and have an element of unpredictability which challenge people's comfort zones, right? There's also this aspect that people want to feel safe. And one of the things that Second Life, right, and kudos for this environment for being able to provide this, but this provides an environment where people can feel safe. And that's a huge component. I think this is one of the core driving factors in terms of why people, when they get in here and they get by the learning curve, why they feel so comfortable. Yeah, free to be a wolf and not be hunted. Pretty much exactly. So, can you put people into a safe environment? This idea that once you're by the technology curve of learning all the different interfaces that are here, then the technology sort of disappears, right? And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It sort of disappears from the understanding of what you're doing. You then become immersed into a shared experience, and guess what? Now all of a sudden this big scary thing, which was called Second Life, now all of a sudden fits well inside your comfort zone, right? And beyond that, it gives you the opportunity that you can expand your reach. You can look for diversification experiences. You can look for emergent and emerging experiences inside this environment, and always know that you've got control, because you can either teleport yourself home or you can hit that little X in the top hand corner and just boogie on out of there the moment it starts getting into an area that you feel uncomfortable, right? You're not stuck in a neighborhood, right, where you feel like you're going to get mugged 30 seconds after you drive inside the the boundaries of whatever, Jane and Bloor. I mean, and that's a very safe place for people to be. It's a very important thing, I think, as well, because I mean, regardless of whether you look at an avatar as being a brand, in which case what the avatar looks like really sort of doesn't matter, or whether you look at it as a tool, everybody eventually wants to get to that safe place. They want to get to that comfort zone where they say, I can do this, right? And I think to a large extent, marketers and people that, within a social networking standpoint, I think we all get this, right? This is not rocket science in terms of people that are here for social purposes. I think marketers don't get this, though, right? And this is, you take a look at Dell having come in here and, they tried to push their products and everybody, right? 4 absolutely gorgeous Sims, right? I think they spent something like $300,000 to put up these 4 sims and not a single soul on there, right? Because while it, it's eye candy, it looked beautiful, it was an extension of their website, which had no emergent properties, it had no diversification properties, it had no expansion of reach, it had no social engagement, it had, it was completely predictable. People got on there, they spent their 5 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever looking around and saying, ooh, isn't this cute? And then they ran off and they joined their friends out dancing at the local club. Because that's their comfort zone, right? They're not there to be pushed. People aren't here to be pushed product, right? People are here to feel safe, right? And at some point, the marketers are going to get that, and God help us all when they finally figure that one out. Communications. And certainly while all of this centers around communications, there was a really interesting thing, a really interesting comment, and one of the reasons why I wanted to refer people to Doug Thompson's interview that we did with him was because he had this idea of this concept of Second Life in any of these types of environments really is this idea of a return to childhood, right? Which I really sort of like, this idea of play, and educators get this idea of play, but I think there's a little bit more to it than we really sort of understand, and this has sort of come out of a lot of the conversations. This idea to go from entrepreneurship through in terms of coming in here and looking at the innovative and looking at what is possible, taking responsibility or accountability for building something, being willing to be intimate in terms of how you deal with people, sharing your dreams, right? This idea of what it was called, the selling of little dreams, so to speak, and then being able to have this concept of play. I mean, if this is not children in the sandbox, I don't know what is, right? So, this is, all of our communications is sort of built around this little tiny model here, and I'm hoping that at some point we'll be able to develop this out a little bit further. But this is extremely important, and I think the companies that get this idea in terms of allowing people to recognize the opportunity, letting them take responsibility or accountability for it, providing that safe environment for intimacy where they can share their dreams and then they can play. Right, the ones that get that will be the ones that will succeed, and those will be, the real big, the big things that will influence avatars in the future. So speaking of, right, so then therefore, what are my predictions for the future of the avatar? Well, I think there's some things that we can really look to based upon what we've been talking about so far in terms of what we can expect. And the first one is probably the one that the marketers just don't want to hear. And that is, this environment is specifically keyed to small group dynamics. Period. End of story. This environment is not for you and 500,000 of your closest friends. Right? And to a large extent, I don't think it ever will be. Right? As much as people want to do, the marketers want to do this. You want football stadiums want to do this. That's not what this environment is about. This environment is you and 20 of your closest friends coming in here and shooting zombies, or going to a presentation, or sitting down at a comedy club, or going over to the Dublin Sims and having a virtual beer with whoever. It's all about those close, personal, intimate relationships and the ability to play with one another. It's about the diversity of experience. It's about people being able to come in here and develop those little dreams, so to speak. They don't have to be big. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be cutting edge in terms of Call of Duty 3 or whatever in terms of that particular type of graphic quality. I mean, in a lot of cases, they have to be good enough that people feel comfortable. They feel inside that safe zone, right? And as soon as you have that, you give people the opportunity for diversity of experience. And that, I think, is going to be one of the core driving things, right? Is how much of these technologies are we going to see coming along? One of the things that we had talked to Bev Landers about at the last Inside the Avatar Studio interview that we did was this idea that Unity 3D is going to introduce a SL-like platform as part of their environment. Now, I'll tell you right up front, that's going to be, if they manage to do it, it might take them 2 or 3 years. If they manage to do it, that will be huge. Because now all of a sudden you've got a cutting-edge graphics program that gives you proper gaming environments that people will be able to go in and do not quite everything that we can do here, but they'll be able to do enough that all of a sudden, maybe Second Life isn't quite, what it should be in comparison, right? And now they don't have to spend $300 a month for a sim. And if they decide that they want 50 sims, it's just a matter of, going out to the cloud and picking up enough computing time in order to make that happen, right? There are things on the table like that are going to completely broaden the nature of the diversity of experience. And in so doing, we're going to see more and more in terms of feedback loops. The idea of feedback loops and rapid prototyping, right? And being able to give people feedback in terms of what their dreams in fact are, what it is that they want to play at, what they want to do, what they want to make happen, how they want people, how they want society to evolve, how they want their politics to evolve, how they want their bank to work with them, how they want to, interact with their next car, buy their next dress, put on their shoes, have a baby. I mean, there's so many different ways in which we could incorporate feedback based upon having these much broader experiences that are available to us through virtual worlds. Once we get those feedback loops in place, and once we can do that rapidly, right, I think you're going to find that people in here are not in here. I mean, we get it. We're here. We get it. Right? People out there will start to get it. Right? They've already started to get it. Right? Avatar changed the roadmap. The movie Avatar changed the roadmap in terms of people said, "Oh, I don't have to be scared of that anymore." Right? I get it. I sort of understand it. Now that James Cameron has done it, I get it. Right? Why it had to be him, I don't know. But, they don't have to be scared of it. Right? And so, the big challenge, I think, for the future avatar is going to be this idea that as these new innovative products come online, as the cloud starts to do what the cloud is supposed to do, as we get the proper toolkits, as we start to get the feedbacks, as the heuristics come on board, as the social networking comes on board, as we get better small group dynamics being introduced, right? The challenge for the future avatar is really going to be this idea of, am I going to adapt to the technology or am I going to adopt it? And I think the future avatar, that is the core question that the future avatar is going to have to ask him or herself, or tiny self or furry self or whatever, right? I mean, that's the question they're going to have to answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up, because I know I'm almost bang on my hour here at the moment, which is very unusual for me. I'm going to leave with a last word, and I realize this last word is very business oriented, but I think it's very telling for people as individuals to pay attention to this particular sentence, right? And this was part of the interview that we did with Dick Dillon, who is part of One Big Soup, Nonprofit Commons, the One Big Soup, the nonprofit group that's over in that area of Second Life, right? Using technology should be used to reach your clients rather than finding clients within the technology, right? Bring technology to your clients. That is such a huge concept in terms of what this environment really means. Almost every single company that has come into this environment to find clients has failed, right? This works from a social perspective. Don't get me wrong, right? People come in here and they bring their hopes and their dreams, and eventually they find a community and they get involved with it. But if you look at it from the other side around, if you turn that around a little bit, people don't want to come in here and then be sold a bill of goods to, right? And we've seen this. The last 9 years has clearly demonstrated this particular concept, right? We are not here so that businesses can find us. We are here so that we can interact with the social networks that are important to us. And if companies can make that connection, right, if businesses can make that connection, if social networks can make that connection, right, then I think they will have gotten it. I think they will have finally gotten what it is to be virtual, what it is to be an avatar, right? And right now, they don't. Second Life doesn't get it. Facebook doesn't get it. Google doesn't get it, right? I mean, they're all doing exactly the same thing, right? They're exploring technology in order to find clients rather than bringing technology to the clients. It was the one big thing that Philip Rosendale did, which was the most important thing he could have ever done in terms of this environment. He brought the technology to the clients. He made it accessible. And for whatever reason, that paradigm was completely destroyed, right? And I don't mean to end this sort of on a downer, but at some point I'm hoping that, the folks at Linden Lab will get it, because this is really what needs to happen. And so, at this point, I think I'm going to wrap up here because I think the next presentation needs to get started. But if you want to hang around for question and answer, I'm more than willing to hang around for that.